Welcome everyone to the virtual cafe. It's our second to last virtual cafe of the year. So thank you for turning up and being a part of the virtual cafe throughout the semester. We've had some absolutely wonderful speakers right through the course of the program, and we're very excited today to welcome Lizzy O'Connor from PhD Media in Melbourne, who's going to speak about media planning and buying, obviously. And I did a little bit of research on Lizzy's past. So Lizzy is from England and from a little bit north of London, I think, or split between a little bit north of London and Liverpool. I had hoped she would speak in a Liverpudlian accent, but she's not because she's been here a few years. But I think she started her career at Mediacom, I think is that what you said, in London, before you gravitated all the way to Australia and to your position now where you are the business director at PhD in Melbourne. So I'm going to hand over to you, Lizzy, for 30 to 40 minutes, see how we go. And then after that, we will open up for questions from students.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that intro, David. Just to cover off a few of the tech issues. If anyone's having trouble hearing me, just let me know. And I have only ventured one video in this presentation, so hopefully it plays. If it doesn't, I will just talk you through what's in it. So to kick off, what I'll be taking you through is just a bit of background on how we get to where we end up within media. So how to break down the brief, what questions to ask the client, determining the right channels to spend in, how to stand out within media, what's important to measure, and then I'll do a quick summary. So to kick off, to break down a brief, I guess it's important to look at what the role of a media agency is in responding to a client brief. I think often creative and media can get confused. We're not there to make the creative, of course. We are there to plan the channels that the creative is going to go into, and therefore the context that creative is being received in. So that is in essence what we do within comms planning. So it's not just buying TV, as some people think. So that we achieve a successful comms plan, it's important to dissect the brief and get the right information out of it from the outset. So a few questions to think about when we first receive a brief, and I know you guys are kind of deep into the process, but I guess this is just a setup to make sure you get to the answer that you want. Whilst briefs often have a few objectives, I think really the main thing to focus on is what's the business objective? What does the client want to achieve or need to achieve? That's going to be the business metrics outlined. Secondary to that is going to be the marketing objective. So what's the marketing team responsible for? In this case, I think in your brief, it's around brand and brand salience. So just understanding what the focus point is. Most briefs will have a bit of brand, a bit of acquisition, but I think you need to know what that hero aim is and how that aligns to their business objective. How will we know if we've succeeded? So when we're looking at planning media, we need to have in mind how that's going to be measured. Once we know the business objective and the marketing objective, we then need to look at how media that we're planning and buying is going to ladder up to those and how it's going to deliver on those metrics. How we generally do that is once we get to the point that we know which channels we're planning, we're looking at the KPIs that we can measure within those channels and how they can then link to things like brand salience, for example. So it might be looking at reach for a brand campaign across the whole campaign, or we might be looking at a cost per lead if it's more of an acquisition campaign. And being really sure of what we're aiming to do within media is important from the outset, and agreeing that with the client as well. Understanding your strategic audience is key. Sometimes we get briefs that just say everyone, or we get briefs with a really, really tiny niche audience. I think you need to understand who the audience is that you're speaking to and who your ads are designed to attract. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the only ones you'll serve your ads to, which we'll get to later, but it does set you up to know what your focal point is when it comes to comms. I have seen your brief, and I think the audience is really clear in that brief, which is great. So understanding that we're aiming for younger people, white-collar professionals, there's an age range there, which is always helpful. And the skew towards females is also a helpful indication there. And then once you've got the answers to those questions, it's really about diving in to some discovery and a bit of research around how we're going to answer this brief and how to give a great response. So we've got a bit of a framework for that in terms of the areas you want to look at. So number one, what's the category? So obviously we're talking about the auto category in your case, but are there any general kind of behaviors or conditions that happen within that category? And of the competitors who are playing in your category, how do they behave? Are there category conventions that you want to align to or break? How can you understand the category so that you can stand out? Your brand. So what are your brand's inherent strengths and weaknesses? I think there's some great stuff in the brief there that you can pull out on those. And how are they linked to the need states of the category? So what are the great things about your brand that align to why people are buying that brand? Looking at the consumer, extremely important. So who's currently buying the category or your brand, and why? Why are they deciding to buy a car? What's that consumer journey? And why are they choosing your brand or not choosing your brand? Breaking that down is really important when we're looking at how we're going to frame a recommendation. And then culture. So we're a brand, we want to sell to people, but we all exist in a world that is impacted by things out of our control and that have nothing to do with your brand. And understanding what's going on in wider society is really important for how you want to frame a response. And so once you've generated some data around this and done some digging into each of these areas, you're using these answers to arrive at an insight. But what is an insight? I think we use the term insight regularly when it comes to strategy and planning, media or creative. Sometimes it's hard to define, but I've tried to have a go here at a bit of a framework. So when you're looking through data, there's lots of facts in there, but are any of those facts particularly surprising or interesting to you? Is there something in there that you weren't expecting that seems at odds with what you might have thought? That's always a good place to start. I think if you present to a client and you pinpoint something they weren't necessarily aware of about any of those areas that I talked to previously, that's always a great place to start from an insight. Does it have implications? So if your insight means that you're going to behave differently in media, that's where you want to get to. If it's a bit of a fact and doesn't really have any meaning or implication, it's probably not something of interest to the client. And then great insights generally end up being a human truth. So I'll take you through some examples, but those great insights, people hear them and you think, wow, that's clever, but it makes so much sense. I think that's a good kind of lens to have on over an insight. So I have got some examples because I think it's a tricky area to kind of nail just talking to it, but I've just pulled some examples of some campaigns that I think were great campaigns built off a clear insight. And these talk to creative, but also to media. So Activia, for example, they were conducting a study. They did some research into their target audience, and they found that 80% of women in the US between 25 and 55 agreed that they were their own worst critic. And they took that, it's a huge stat, so clearly a common behavior amongst women, but they took that to identify an opportunity to help them target their female audience and feel better about themselves, and obviously aligning that to their product. It starts inside, so making them feel better inside to help them more broadly. Pret a Manger, which is a sandwich shop in the UK, they identified data around people moving, trends around starting to eat more healthily. Less people were snacking on unhealthy foods. So they aligned their brand to that, and they did a little veggie pop-up where they just sold vegetarian food. So it can be something as simple as identifying a key trend that your brand can align to. Always, which is a sanitary brand, they identified that there was a feeling amongst girls that they felt limited in what they could do when they were menstruating, and so they kind of took that out of the context of just what you're doing with their product and helped to empower them to feel they could keep going, and then use that hashtag like a girl just to kind of flip that trope on its head around doing things like a girl. And then one of the most quoted probably brand campaigns of recent times was Snickers, which is the "You're Not You When You're Hungry" campaign. This has won multiple awards, and it's basically come from the insight that people's personalities, and it was initially targeted mostly at men. Men's personalities can change when they're hungry, and they're not themselves when they're hungry. And they applied that within their media behavior as well. So what they wanted to do within media, once they had that insight, was to drive fame. So disproportionate attention and fame through executing this insight, which is "You're not you when you're hungry." So the launch of Snickers happened in the US initially. They went for fame. They ran their ad in the Super Bowl. Great way in the US to kick off a campaign that you want people to pay attention to. They used celebrity Betty White in an ad where she is a football player on the field. So within the UK, they got local celebrities or national celebrities to share a tweet that was not like them at all. So, a celebrity who's generally lovely and bubbly might have shared a really angry tweet, and they got the celebrities to share a few tweets and then come back to the fact that they'd done this because they were hungry and aligned with the brand and got fame and attention that way. And the example on screen there is when they came to Australia to launch this, they aligned this with data around social feeling and how people were talking about when they were hungry. They created a hunger rhythm. So they linked the data, social data, to a meter that measured how hungry people were and linked the price of a Snickers in 7-Eleven to that data. So that's a brilliant use of data there, but still aligning to the overall kind of overarching comms platform of "You're not you when you're hungry." And because that media behavior was aimed at driving fame, they did some small scale things, but that kind of drove disproportionate attention and got people talking about them. Let me just.
They also caused quite a bit of controversy with their building site.
Yes, the Australian execution was also, builders shouting nice things at women instead of the stereotypical catcalling, which generated a lot of controversy. So when it comes to determining the right channels, we've got to go back to the audience. So we kind of break our audience apart here a little bit. So we've got the comms target, which is the audience that will be defined in your brief as the focus audience. But within media, we need to make sure that we are reaching as many people as we can who might want to buy your product. So for example, the comms target is obviously going to be focused on what's going to be valuable to the brand. And then we just need to reach everyone. So for example, for this brief, your comms target we've discussed already. The media target might be anyone who's eligible to drive a car. So anyone 17 plus who could buy your brand. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Why shouldn't we just buy against our target audience? I think it's a question that we get asked a lot and clients ask a lot. It sounds much more efficient to only talk to those people who you want to talk to and who you want to buy your product. These quotes are all from the book How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. And this book was based on lots and lots of data around media and campaigns. And I'm just going to read them out. So growth in market share comes by increasing popularity, gaining buyers of all types, many of whom will only be light buyers of the brand. So we've got to think about the fact that some people may never really think of your brand. You may pop into their head one day and they may buy your brand. That doesn't mean they're a brand fanatic, but they're still going to buy your brand and you still want that sale. So it's important not to exclude them. Brands mainly compete as mere lookalikes, with consumers not really distinguishing from one from another. I think you can sometimes be guilty when you work in marketing and advertising to thinking that people think about your brand all day, every day. They don't. They see millions of messages from millions of brands every day. I'm exaggerating, probably not millions. But I think we need to be realistic with how important your brand is to that customer and make sure you're reaching as many people as you can. And Byron Sharp has said that brand growth is therefore largely about building physical and mental availability. So you want to be seen by people and you want to grab their attention when they've got that mental availability and start to build those associations with your brand. Also, it's better for ROI. So, it's always going to come down to the dollar. This is analysis by Binet and Field in the long and the short of it. When we look at only targeting your own customers, that's obviously more of a retention strategy. If you're targeting customers who you think you want to reach, you get a certain return. If you target the whole market, you're going to get more money back. So it's really important to consider that when we're thinking about which channels we should be looking at. So this is PhD very much are aligned to this way of planning and buying. As we say, it's better to reach 2 people once than 1 person twice. There's obviously value in frequency for driving memory, but we'd rather do that across channels and in different environments than really hammering one audience heavily with your message. So when it comes to creating a role for comms, this is PhD's approach to creating a role for comms, and I'll talk you through it. But essentially, you want to go back to the marketing objective and understand what you're trying to do. Are you trying to communicate information and get someone to do something, or are you trying to build associations and get someone to see or think something? Again, it's likely to be a balance that you want to do. So you might be trying to use certain channels to do the building job, which is see my brand. This is what I want you to see, and this is what I want you to feel. And then you might also need to add in, impacting or activating channels where that's where you're prompting someone to buy something or to call someone because they want to express an interest in your brand. And there's obviously different channels that align to those different roles. And then also you've got to think about how you use your creative messaging within each of those roles as well. So you might have social, for example, you might have that in building because you're going to grow reach, but you also might have it in activating. And the difference there would be potentially the format that you're going to use to communicate the information. In building, it's more about developing emotion and getting people to engage with the brand. Within activating, it might be a click through to the website that you're trying to drive there. So it's just an example of how you want to be really clear on what you're using each channel to do and what you want the creative to be saying within each of those role for comms. When it comes to buying and just generally understanding how much reach you can get from each channel, this chart shows within each of the demos along the bottom which percentage of them have used each of these media touch points. And so it just gives you a really broad overview. I mean, internet is a bit of a misnomer. Who isn't on the internet most of the day, every day? But so if you're looking at where you want to get reach and how you can align your channels to that, TV is still a massive reach driver. We obviously have conversations around which audiences are more or less likely to be watching TV. You're still going to get mass reach through TV. Again, I could go through those, but you can see kind of where you get broad reach and where you get slightly less reach. I think then when you tune into a specific audience, so if we're looking at 25 to 34, which in this case is the purple audience, you can see where they start to over-index. So we're looking at Spotify, a larger percentage of them versus the other audience are going to engage with Spotify. So that might be a good environment to look at. Again, when we're looking at pay TV or SVOD, that audience is more likely to engage with that. So that's just to give you a bit of a scale of high reach to low reach channels more broadly. And I know it's difficult because we don't have exact CPMs to play with in this, but again, this is to just give you a scale of how much reach costs in each of those channels. No surprise that some of those really high reach channels are expensive. But as I said, you can get great reach on a channel like social across a certain audience for much less, but you've got to think about the environment that someone is in when they're browsing. The cost of these things also depends on things like format length. It's going to cost more to run a 30-second ad than a 15-second ad, for example, and also a level of targeting. So if you're going into digital and you only want to buy a certain audience, it's going to cost you more to buy a more targeted audience. So you've got to work out whether you think that's valuable or not. Are you going to get the return on spending slightly more to reach a targeted audience? And when it comes to flighting, so depending on your budget, you may or may not be able to run channels consistently across the whole of your campaign. Likely you won't, because that's an expensive exercise. There's different reasons for looking at different flighting strategies, and you probably execute different flighting strategies within different channels. So if we're thinking about high cost, high reach channels, that's where you want to understand whether you're going to run the whole time or use a different flighting strategy. So there's a few examples here. So bursting, that's where you have a big burst at the beginning of a campaign. You want to generate a lot of reach very quickly. Then you might come off for a period, and then you have another burst, and you might do that across 6 months, a year, whatever your campaign length. That's generally when people have got something new to say. It might be a campaign launch where it's really worth putting in the money at the beginning to gain attention. Then continuity, if you're lucky enough to have enough budget and you're communicating something that people are broadly familiar with, you might look at a more even spread of spend. But generally, we don't have the dollars to do that across the whole period. And then pulsing. So pulsing you might use when it's a message that people have heard already from your brand, but you still want to be generating some quite consistent reach. And this works pretty well when we also think about the fact that when people see an ad, they don't forget about it immediately. So it's called the half-life. People say the half-life of media is around a week. You might remember something a week later. And so if you're trying to do week on, week off strategies, that can work quite well, understanding that you don't need to be in front of them every week. Again, when we're thinking about how you might apply this across channels, if you've got high reach, expensive channels, you might want to pulse those, and then underneath that have an always on digital approach to support that, because it's going to be cheaper to be ever present in most of the digital environments. So we talked about reach, which is great. You understand which channels you can use to reach a lot of people, but are you getting attention? Are you getting eyeballs? So to understand that, we need to think about how engaged people are and how much people are looking or watching when they are experiencing different ads in different environments. So this is just an example from Walk that shows how long people engaged with a video in different platforms. So we've got in-feed mobile, pre-roll mobile, and TV. If you look at a 30-second ad, people might only be watching 6 seconds of that ad when you're in feed on your phone. So if you're aware that that's the behavior, potentially you might cut down to a shorter format in that environment. Or if you do want to run the same asset, you've got to think about how you structure the messaging. So if there's something you want people to know, and on average they're watching 6 seconds, try and get that piece of information in that 6 seconds. Get your branding happening up front. Make sure people know what they're seeing from the beginning. If we go into pre-roll, they're going to see slightly more of that ad, especially if it's a forced pre-roll, for example. So you can start to kind of draw out that messaging. It might be a more emotional ad that you're running, give people a chance to engage. And then obviously even TV, I think the point here is that people are watching the whole ad technically on TV because it's going to run. But when we look at the breakdown there across active avoidance and passive and eyes on, you can see how much time people are actually looking at that ad on TV. So you can see there on it's essentially might be 10 seconds. We don't know which 10 seconds, they might tune in and out, but it's just good to be aware that just because you play a 30-second ad does not mean people are paying attention for the whole of those 30 seconds. So how to behave.
That's really interesting data. Is that from eye tracking studies?
Yeah, it is. When you think about how people are behaving then and applying that attention strategy to media and to creative, I've used a different example of channels here, but if we've got cinema, we know the level of attention of someone is, we've got their full attention, which is amazing. I personally, I'm a big believer in cinema as a media channel. Fortunately, they're not open at the moment in Melbourne. But you've got everyone's full attention and your ad is on a huge screen. So that's great. It's expensive, but you know you're going to be getting their attention. When you're thinking about what to put in that ad, you can be very visual. You can tug on people's heartstrings. If you are desperate to run a 60-second piece of content, do it in cinema because people are going to watch the full 60 seconds of that. It's also good to think about audio when you're in cinema. So people are seeing, but they're also listening. So do you have any, brand audio cues you want to drop in? Is there a piece of emotive music you want to use? I think that's important to think about there. When we're thinking about screens, we've got TV and mobile multitasking. So here it's about trying to keep their attention. So if someone sees your ad on TV and it's boring, they're going to tune out and look at their phone probably. So try and balance that entertainment and information that you're giving on TV. It's another good place for emotion as well. I think, we've all seen some great emotional TV ads in our time, and I think it's still relevant to run those in that environment. But you've got to try and keep people's attention. Mobile multitasking, so it could be a second screen. So if you're thinking that someone's second screening, do you want to serve them an emotive ad on TV and give them information on their phone? You can even start to think about how those two things might coexist. And then peer-to-peer sharing. So if we're thinking about social here, there's not very much attention going on. People aren't scrolling their Facebook feeds to look at your ad or Instagram or whatever they're using. They're scrolling to see information and fun things from friends or people they follow. So that's where you want to be, grabbing attention. You might want to run, it says social video there, but I think within those environments, it's really important to think about what's native to that environment. So Instagram story ads, obviously, are pretty popular at the moment, and some brands are doing a better job than others of feeling like they're native to that platform and helping, people not want to just instantly swipe past that ad. Sorry, there's a train going past. It's also important to think about channels. So if you've been given a budget and you want the reach, you might think, well, why wouldn't I just spend it all on TV? There's been lots and lots of work done into the best way to use different channels. And ultimately, whatever different channels you use, it's better to use more channels. Obviously, only if they are going to reach your audience and they're relevant for your campaign. But the more channels you can afford to spread your budget over, the more different ways you're going to get people to see your message, and you're going to drive that campaign reach. The charts on the left, they are from econometric analysis that was run by Analytic Partners and Google. They're looking at the ROI benefits of running multi-channel. So that's across offline and digital. And they also have got some data there at the bottom, which is showing TV, and then digital with out of home, and digital with TV, digital with out of home, and digital on its own. So running offline channels actually improves the efficiency of the digital that you're running, which is great. On the right hand side, this is a study from Walk that came out this year, in which they've analysed I think all the Cannes entries they could get their hands on. So all really highly awarded work and campaigns. And they've used all of the data for that to look at the effectiveness of campaigns. So here it's showing their effectiveness scale, which that you've got on the left-hand side. And effectiveness is built up of a few different metrics. It could be brand and ROI. It's basically essentially not just looking at ROI, I think is the point here. It's brand metrics too. So they're saying when you've got 1 to 5 channels, 5 to 7, etc. As you can see, broadly speaking, as the volume of channels you're using grows, the more the campaign becomes more effective. And it makes sense. If you're able to communicate slightly differently to people in different channels, you're broadening your appeal and you're helping get that message in different ways. So I think another big question that's, buzzing around the communications industry at the moment, and especially within media, is when is it appropriate to be more targeted? So yes, we want broad reach, but there's obviously a lot of capability that we have now to target people, and there are reasons why we would do that and when. So being in market when your buyers are in market is important. I think if you know there's distinct seasonality around your brand or your category, I should say, it's important to be there and understand the consumer journey when people are thinking about buying and planning on buying and then actually buying. There isn't any point in selling a turkey for Christmas. That's a very British example, isn't it? But there's no point trying to sell a turkey for Christmas in April. It's just, there's no point. So I think there's really clear and obvious reasons why you might do that. I think specifically to the auto industry, I know there's a huge push end of financial year. So have a think about, is that when you see sales spike? Do you want to be there in the lead up so that you're on the consideration list? I think that's really important, and that's a reason to be targeted. Targeting in and out of market audiences differently, I think, is important. I think if you know that people are shopping for, they're on car sales, they're giving off lots of signals, they're searching cars, etc. It's worth trying to target those people, but with specific messages. So if you already know they're in market, try and reach them with a kind of a lower down the funnel, a closer to purchase message. If you are not sure that someone's in market, that's when you need to be trying to just give them the broadest message that you can about why they should think about your brand. Understanding the consumer journey is important, and the role of comms for each segment. So this kind of talks to the point above, but when you want to talk to someone differently because of their behavior, it's important to think about how you might be able to do that. So, for example, you might have a younger car buyer who's never bought a car before. What's their influence? What's their consumer journey? How might that be different to someone who's slightly older? Are they going to read more advice online? Are they going to ask their parents for advice? Is someone older going to be quicker to go from consideration to purchase because they've bought a car 5 times before and it's all easy to them? I think that's an important part of thinking about how you might reach different people in different ways. And then using context at scale to increase relevance. So it would be great if every ad we ran was perfectly in context with its environment and what's going on in culture. I think brands have tried to do that and had varying levels of success. What we have access to now is a lot of technology that means that we can essentially create one ad within digital. That might be out of home, it might be display, and have dynamic elements. So where you can be contextual but do it at scale, that's worth doing. I guess an example to give you is for out of home, you might be running an ad that's really focused on being in Melbourne versus being in Geelong. You can do that quite cost effectively because it's a digital format, and swap in the names of those places because it's going to appeal to people who are local, but it's not compromising the cost of what you're running. And then I just wanted to give you a few kind of recent channel trends. I think the one everyone's talking about is TikTok. Haven't downloaded it personally, but I do see TikTok videos on Instagram. So people seem to be sharing cross-platform there. But it was earlier in the year when we did a bit of a deep dive into the data. It was the 7th most downloaded app of all time. And it was only released globally in 2017. So obviously it's got huge scale. It skews a lot younger. I think we understand that. 77% of its audience are between 13 and 34, which is huge. It also has quite a female skew. So it's a 62% female audience at this point in time within Australia. So I think it's a great environment for finding people in a place where they're there to have fun and it's happy, and there's not much negativity on TikTok. However, I would warn that their brand safety checks and balances aren't 100% yet. They don't have the experience of someone like a Facebook, and there have been a couple of incidents recently where brands have pulled money from TikTok because there has been some unsavory content shared. So that's a watch out, but a new and emerging platform. Also, COVID has seen Spotify have a massive increase in. Right, so Twitch, same gaming is a huge environment. So Twitch and YouTube gaming saw massive increases in viewing through COVID. and we're starting to look into, running ads within games that have got, billboards within them. You can actually advertise your brand within those environments. And YouTube, I've put up there, not because it's a new channel in any way, but the way people are consuming YouTube during COVID has been markedly different to how they normally do. They saw a huge upload of videos with "at home" in the title, so people obviously doing more things at home. And then in terms of what people were watching, there's a lot of with me content, so cook with me, study with me, all of those types of things. So I think I know the campaign that you're planning is running next year, but I think it's worth understanding the context of the environment and how things are starting to shift at this point in time. Okay, so how to stand out. I'll whiz through this. I know I only got 18 minutes. So this quote I took from our head of strategy and planning of APAC, Chris Stevenson, when he gave us a presentation about media creativity recently. The enemy of media creativity is thinking we're here to work out where the ads go. So obviously we do work out where the ads go, but that's not all planning media is. And there is huge room to be creative with the way you use and execute media. Why should we be creative with media? Again, it's all going to come down to being efficient. So more creatively awarded campaigns end up being more efficient. I think initially you can think that it could seem expensive or risky, but essentially you're going to stand out more and you're going to create more engagement and attention. And it's proven by Benet and Fields, who've kindly done the work for us, that the more creative you'll be, the more effective your campaign will be. Okay, here's my video. I will try and play it. I did connect with audio before. Let me see if it will play. Give me a shout if you can't hear it.
To grow its small share of the transportation market, Via Rail, Canada's national rail passenger service, needed to steal shares from cars, its unbeatable competitor. Via Rail tapped on the insight that most North American drivers, because of their unconditional love of cars, are too optimistic when estimating their arrival time. They failed to factor in real-time road conditions. The strategy was therefore to target the exact moment drivers realized they chose the wrong transportation option and remind them, precisely at that time, that train is a faster option when road conditions are not ideal. We created programming interfaces that combined real-time traffic and weather data and integrated that data feed at each touch point. At any given point in time, the message was customized to each consumer. It took into consideration their current geoposition, their end destination, and real-time traffic and weather data. We identified potential travelers by targeting those who looked up for weather or traffic information for a destination outside their hometown. By leveraging a reverse IP, we were able to serve digital banners communicating travel times for the train versus the car in real time. Our search campaigns were also connected to a custom script, updating our messages and bids based on actual traffic information for each searched destination. We used digital out-of-home to target cars drivers at the exact moment they realize their trip will be longer than expected. Messages were adapted in real time, displaying the estimated arrival time based on the geolocation of each board and current traffic conditions. Finally, we leveraged our out-of-home partnership to collect all mobile device IDs of the drivers stuck in traffic jams. We retargeted them as they arrived to their destination, reminding them of the frustration of being stuck in traffic. As a result of this campaign, train ridership rose by 11.7%. Year-over-year revenues increased by 13.9%. The conversion rate increased by 14% on Via Rail's booking engine. In the end, data won over cars. The Via Rail stole shares to what seemed an unbeatable competition.
I love this example. It's extremely data-led, obviously, and I don't know how they managed to do all of that. It would be a huge undertaking, but it's extremely successful.
Very clever. Very clever.
Yeah, so clever. This is a great example from Burger King, where they have essentially understood how consumers are now interacting via Zoom. And this is obviously during COVID. I think it came from, South America. Yes, Buenos Aires. So this is essentially them jumping on this trend. And Burger King started a promotion where if you put their billboard or their ad in your Zoom background, you got a free Whopper, which is just such a clever, quick turnaround on a media idea. Really simple when you think about it, but really clever and well executed. And then I love this one because this is about how media and use of media can actually create social change. So, and this one is about essentially making your own media channel. So this campaign was targeting the fact that within Germany, tampons were taxed as a luxury good. So the tampon tax was 19%. Normal goods are taxed at 7%. And the female company wanted to think of a way that they could, I guess, draw attention to this and start some social change. They set up a change.org. They wanted people to sign a change.org survey, so that this would get in front of Parliament, essentially. They also wanted to sell their tampons. So what they came up with was the fact that books weren't taxed as luxury goods. Books were taxed at 7%. So they sold a book which happened to contain tampons. Extremely clever. The buzz generated around this campaign ended up meaning that the change.org had ended up having enough signatures to get it to Parliament, and this bill has now passed. As of January 2020, tampons in Germany are now taxed at 7%. I love this example because they've been extremely clever about what they wanted to do. They're still selling a product, but they've managed to overcome law, essentially, with this one, and it was really clever. And I think the message here is, think outside the box. Don't necessarily be confined by the list of channels I've provided you already. If there's something you can create, then that's really exciting as well.
Yeah, that's a great campaign. I saw that on some publication. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Amazing, incredible. And not only did it change the law in Germany, it then encouraged other countries around and globally to have that conversation. This is just more of a kind of watch out that great media creativity always requires close alignment and collaboration with creative. I think we're in charge of the channels and they're in charge of the creative, but the best ideas come when you get together and do both things at the same time. And you share with each other what you're thinking about channels and they share what they're thinking about creative. That's where we always get the best results. What to measure. So to take us back to the beginning of the presentation around what is important to be looking at when you're thinking about measuring your campaign. So yes, there's business metrics. That measurement should come from the client. How did the campaign do? Has it shifted their market share? Have they had an increase in sales? The marketing metrics and brand tracking. So what brand tracking does your client have in place? What element are they specifically looking at? I think in this case, it's brand salience. And then media metrics. So making sure you're able to track everything that you've been doing, so you can go back and say, we predicted this much reach, we got this much reach, or we predicted we'd drive this many people to site or calls, and this is what we've ended up with. So that's really important and kind of rounds out everything that you'll be proposing in a brief, is how you want to measure that and report on your success. And that is nearly it. Just a quick summary. I think 3 things, if you walk away with nothing but 3 things, I'd like you to think about being really clear on your metrics and what that means for your planning. Reach all possible buyers, but obviously I've given some advice there around when it is appropriate to target. And be creative, have fun. Really, I think brainstorming is probably one of my favorite things about working in media, and it definitely applies to media channel usage as much as it does to coming up with your actual creative. So thank you. And would anyone like to ask any questions?
Yeah, look, thank you very much, Lizzy. Clap. That was absolutely wonderful. I think we'll just open the floor to students before academics may have a few questions. Students, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Hi, I'm Meg. I was wondering, when you're talking about measuring metrics, how do you plan for possible metrics? So ones that you're unable to, so for example, if you're planning for earned media, but how do you demonstrate how much media you may be garnering, and how can you demonstrate that in return on investment?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, we don't personally handle, obviously, the earned media. That would more be PR, but there are definitely metrics that you can understand from PR as to what type of activity you're proposing and what buzz you think that might generate. I mean, with most metrics, it's about going back and looking at what we've done before or what someone else has done before and saying, okay, we think this social post that we're going to put X amount of dollars behind is going to generate this much paid reach, but we also think that we'd like to aim to get 20 shares or 100 comments or whatever that kind of earned metric is. Having a think about what's going to look like success for the client when it comes to engagement, I think is the main thing for earned.
Okay, cool. And the other question, one of the other questions that I had was, you're talking about when with the free-to-air TV or the online with the eye tracking data,
yeah,
because people were only actually concentrating on the long-term, like the 30-second ads, do you think that those are actually worth the money for the 30 seconds if people aren't going to pay attention for 30 seconds?
Yeah, again, good question. I think we see from tracking and ROI data that TV does work. So I don't think it's a case of throwing it out the window. I think it's just thinking about what you want to get across in 30 seconds, and just understanding that you might need to try and engage people slightly more than assuming that they're watching that the whole time. I think a key with any video asset, especially TV, is, as I said before, thinking about the visual, but also thinking about the audio. Obviously, within social, people can have sound off. It's unlikely you're going to be watching the TV with the sound off. So I do think that 30-second ads are still worth doing. I think it's very difficult for creative agencies to tell more of that kind of emotive brand-led story in a shorter format. If it were only based on efficiency and kind of what we see from shorter form ads, we'd only run 15s, but that would be if you were able to communicate your message really quickly in a 15. And to build emotion, we generally would use, excuse me, a 30-second ad. The majority of campaigns that I see will use a mix of both. So you use the 30 to tell that slightly longer story and get a bit more emotion, and then you use a 15 to reinforce that message, but it's more efficient. I think as well, you then need to think about other forced environments where people might be more engaged. So BVOD, for example, if you're buying that, it's more likely that someone's going to watch the ad because they are, it's more of a lean-in environment. They've chosen to watch whatever they're streaming, and they have to watch that 30-second ad.
Yeah, right. Would you then say that it's because you'll have that 30-second ad in TV, which is often more of an emotive setting anyway, would you therefore recommend to have the shorter setting videos in the social environment when they're more likely to be distracted?
Yeah, definitely. I think still worth running 15s on TV because you will generate reach more efficiently that way, and you can often get the crux of your message through in a 15. I think within social, the max you'd want to run is 15, unless your video is a beautiful really engaging video. I mean, for example, campaigns that I've worked on where we've run long form ads in social are usually to do with a social cause. So Mardi Gras, for example, is something where we've run something that it's more of a complete brand piece, and it's about a social cause that people are already engaged with. If you're talking about your product, likely it's going to be a shorter video. So yeah, for social, I would try and keep it under 10 seconds if you can. Again, if you're going to go to 15, I'd recommend not repurposing the 15 from TV. Even if all you do is recut it so the information is in a different order, you've got to think about what's happening in those first few seconds within the social environment. Too many brands are still guilty of taking a TV ad and putting it in social. And it's quick to at least reorder the information you've got, even if it's not coming up with a completely bespoke ad for that platform.
You've got the downward pressure from social networks like Facebook saying we want 5 seconds too, don't you? You know what I mean? So they're saying, well, we want it shorter. This is the way to go.
It's very hard to get anything across in 5 seconds.
Yeah, basically a logo.
Yeah, logo and shout something. I don't know, music.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah. I do feel bad for creative agencies for that reason. That the bumpers in YouTube, for example, the 6-second format. It's essentially just an image you can really use and potentially some words.
Lizzy, I've got a question. Do they still do top and tail? So you might open with a 30-second brand, end with a 15-second retail?
Yeah, as in first and last ad break. Yeah, you can buy, within TV. You can buy first and last in break. It just comes with a huge premium.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it's essential that your ads be seen in the same place, and we do have this conversation semi-regularly, if you've got consecutive messaging, or like you say, you want to do a long form followed by a shorter form, it is doable, but it's a lot more expensive.
What would you say is the risk of advertising on like the next big thing? Say you just ignore TikTok because you think, well, it's already happening.
Yeah.
Do you have like you have to do a risk analysis, obviously. What sort of factors do you think about? I'd
say number one, assuming especially it's a digital environment, number one would be brand safety. If it's to do with user-generated content. And number two would probably, again, if it's digital, I'm only thinking digital, number two would be tracking. I think newer technology platforms generally aren't as well set up for tracking results. Even audio, for digital audio, for a long time, it was difficult to prove to clients that someone hearing your Spotify ad is doing anything. So I think, thinking about those two things is key. What else could there be? It's a good question. If you can find the next new thing, then let me know. Yeah, those would be my main ones. It's also difficult to benchmark costs, just from a practical point of view. But clients do love a new thing, so.
Well, I suppose you have to have a client that's willing to take a risk, though, too, because I guess it's a percentage of their marketing budget. So they're going to go, well, who are you communicating to? What's the return on investment? And how many sales we're going to get?
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, I think just as a broad brush approach to setting aside money for innovation, we work to a 70-20-10 split across portfolios where we can. So 70% of the money you put in, what it's guaranteed, you've got ROI data, it's going to do the trick. 20% might be something that you've tested in another area of the business, or you've dipped your toe in the water before and it's still it's in the maybe pile, but you've got some research on it. And then 10% is that it's completely new, we don't know how it's going to perform, and we try and set expectations up that may do nothing. It may be terrible, we won't use it again, but obviously that's why it's only a smaller percentage of the budget. But that's how we try and approach it, to make sure we challenge ourselves as well to think of something slightly different for each campaign. It might only even be a different targeting strategy, but it will be something we haven't done before and something that the client is open to testing and taking a risk on.
Awesome. I have another question.
Yeah.
In terms of guerrilla marketing, do you do anything with that, or would that be more up to the marketing or creative agency to track?
No, it definitely falls within our remit. It's not, I have for most of my career worked on financial services brands who are not fans of risk. So I have personally not done that much of it. It can work really well. When I worked at Cara before I worked at PhD here, and they had Disney. Disney used to do this a lot for obviously launching films, and things like painting murals. I think for Ant-Man they did tiny out-of-home billboards. Things like that can be really effective. I'm pretty sure they did some kind of light projection in Sydney for the launch of one of the movies. Might have been Avengers or something. But that would be within media.
And so you said before about the just guessing or having a benchmark. You say we hope to generate this many views, or we hope to have this much foot traffic. Would you measure that the same way for guerrilla?
Yeah, so much. I think that with Gorilla, it helps that, you know, whoever the agency is that you're working with, and I don't know any off the top of my head, to be perfectly honest, because I haven't had to do any personally, but whoever you're working with, they will have done this before, and they will know, you know, this is likely to do this, this is likely to do that. They also, if it's anything experiential, they at least know foot traffic, or, you know, how many people live in the area and that kind of thing. And all of those metrics are the types of things that you would be kind of buying towards, essentially. You don't want to do something amazing and know that 2 people are going to see it.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful.
2 people are going to share on social.
Hey, Liz, I just want to ask, and I've asked this to previous execs who presented, and I said it's all very much around this issue of the post-COVID world. So, you know, the spend pre-COVID, I guess, is something you really understand, and in COVID, I guess you don't. It's just everything's just all over the place. So, you know, like out of home is was it 50% drop? You know, cinema's dead. You know what I mean? There's some media channels which simply don't work at all. There's a massive increase in e-commerce and digital. So, you know, that's all very well and good, but is this just a hiccup? And is, you know, so projecting forward to this campaign, the work the students are working on, you know, second half of next year, is it simply back to normal? You know, is that the world that we're just going to actually, this has just been a hiccup year?
I think the main difference is going to be that despite the fact that we can work back in the office, I don't think we're going back to the office in the same way that we did. And obviously the roll-on effects of that are on commuting and traffic. So things like out of home, I don't think would necessarily see the same kind of rush hour numbers that we used to see. Anything that's to do with trains, you know, wrapping trams, all that kind of thing, I think that will be affected a lot. So, you know, and even, you know, in-office advertising, that used to be a thing. I think that's going to be the main shift in behaviour, and therefore will affect media channels. And I think it's also thinking about then what people's day does look like, which is spending most of your time on a screen if you used to work in an office, and I think there's probably opportunity to think about the home slightly differently and people's movement patterns. So if we're thinking about small format out of home,
that's a tip. I like the home idea. That's great.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, if we're thinking cars, which I know is what this brief is for, how are people using cars if they're not driving to work? Or are the people who are going back going to be more likely to drive than take public transport because it's safer? So thinking about those impacts, but I mean, I know huge companies like Google have said people aren't going back until mid next year, even if they are able to. I think we've all adapted to varying degrees, but we've all adapted to working from home, and I can't see anyone rushing back to the 9-to-5, 5-day week.
Yeah, look, that's really interesting, a view of the future, and I think, you know, that's the reading we're all getting, even at universities. You know, we're like PhD, we're a massive employer, but we're all not there.
Yeah, I know. It is interesting, and then I guess, you know, future, if that's the case, there is less need for office space. So what's that space going to be used for? How our city's going to look different in the future? People are going to start moving out because you don't need to be physically in the office. So what does that do for movement patterns? It's going to be an interesting new world.
Lizzy, on that, I just want to make a final call for questions. Last question, any student anyone else? Meg, you've already had lots. Anyone else got a question? You can
I just had a quick question.
Caelan's got it.
I just wanted to ask if I could get your email address. I just wanted to have a bit more advice on one of the mediums you were talking about that me and my team were looking at.
Yeah, David, do you want to set that up?
I can pass that on. Caelan's one of my students, so that's.
I had the same question anyway.
Yeah, I can do that for you too, Meg.
Yeah, thanks very much.
You'll get hit up for LinkedIn connections as well, I'm sure. Look, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much, Lizzy. It's been a wonderful insight into media planning and purchasing and the changing consumer, the changing consumer habits. And I think that, it is a changing world out there. And I think, in the work that the students are doing this semester, they need to be on top of that. So it's been very insightful. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Lizzy.